Okay, let's quickly go over some of the visual elements of this scene, the sinking car scene from Psycho. Again, really just about 45 seconds of the film. Okay, so this is not a depth of field shot. It's a pretty close shot. Depth of field meaning how much is actually in focus. You see this tree that actually acts as a framing element in the film, in the scene here. Not very much depth of field, so not a lot is in focus as compared to the other shot of the car. This has a long depth of field because everything is in focus in the background. Not the best scene really to demonstrate depth of field, but that's the difference. You can see the difference between these two shots, okay? There's a lot of negative space here on the right, on screen right, but screen left, either the director of photography or Hitchcock himself decided to have this tree limb there that actually adds a little bit of asymmetry to the scene. Okay. It's another. You can also demonstrate the rule of thirds here. Remember the rule of thirds? You generally you can divide the screen horizontally into thirds, and then also you can do it vertically. Okay. You want, the viewer tends to want to look into the upper third of the screen space, so that's where Hitchcock has framed, or the director of photography for Psycho has framed Norman Bates' head. Very little space on top, in the middle. He's actually very front and center. They decided to do that for aesthetic reasons, to create tension, probably. All right. Again, I've already showed you that this is a point of view shot. We already talked about that, which requires two, the establishing shot and then the point of view shot. Okay, I think that's all we really need to say about that scene, and next we will talk about composition. All right, let's quickly talk about some of the composition elements. Now on the list for the discussion board, it makes a distinction between visual elements and composition. Sometimes there's some overlap. For instance, when we talk about open versus closed frame. This is Hitchcock usually is a closed frame kind of director. The difference between open and closed frame is a little bit more advanced film theory, so you don't really have to worry too much about that. Hitchcock tends to have closed frame in terms of he's not wandering around a crowd with a camera and allowing Norman to kind of wander in and out. He tends to have very controlled imagery, very controlled shots. Okay, so it's closed frame. Framing lines. When we're talking about framing lines, and sometimes these are called vectors. All right, the lines here are all pretty round. This isn't the best scene for talking about vectors and lines, although you can see how there's some line composition here on this side of the frame. And it might be better to demonstrate with this shot. This shot uses framing elements of this tree. Right, these trees are sort of used to frame the shot. When we talk about lines and vectoring, think about the human eye. The human eye and the human brain, we tend to be drawn to lines, and we tend to let lines direct our vision. It's just a natural part of the human brain. And visual artists think about these things. This isn't the best scene for that, but again, this is what we talk about, the way different lines point to different aspects of the screen. You can say that maybe this line sort of leads the eye toward the center. Okay, that's what we mean by framing lines and symmetry versus asymmetry. All right. Again, I've talked about the framing of the cars and the trees. And let's look at the angle. This is first of all, the type of shot it is again, this is a mid-close range shot, or a close-up, mid-close-up. If it was a full close-up, his head would completely fill the screen. You'd see a lot of detail. It looks like it's at an eye-line view, but it looks slightly down. So it's almost low angle, but not really low. So you could see the sky behind him, but it's almost a direct eye-line view, slightly down. All right. Gaze is another aspect of lines and vector. Gaze, that's not on your list for the discussion board, but gaze is where people's eyes are looking. And sometimes film theorists talk about the gaze of the camera itself. In other words, your position as a viewer and your gaze into the screen world here. But for our purposes here in this scene, I think Norman's gaze here is very interesting. He doesn't have the actor looking directly into the camera. Some film directors will do that to create tension. If you think of maybe Silence of the Lambs, Jonathan Demme had actors looking straight into the camera in a lot of those scenes. Norman Bates here is looking slightly off, but you can see the expression in his eyes and looking slightly off camera, but almost directly into the camera to create tension. I think that's a really good effect. Okay. Next, we will talk about lighting, a little extra note on sound, and then we will look at the shot list.